Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of South Carolina.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Allsep.
All right, everybody, welcome into the final Gamecock Pod Live of 2025. Today is Wednesday, December the 17th. This is episode number 1918 of Gamecock Pod Daily and Gamecock Pod Live. I am your host, Keith Allsep. Happy holidays and Merry Christmas to everyone out there. In just a few minutes, when we have a great show on tap today, in just a few minutes, we will be joined by Clark Brooks from On3 and Rivals, formerly known as that SEC Stat Cat, now a national college football analyst for On3 and Rivals. We are going to get his take on South Carolina's disappointing season and the radical departure from NFL-based offenses to the Kendal Briles spread NASCAR up-tempo offense, and how LaNorris Sellers, what Clark saw from him this year compared to 2024, and how the Kendal Briles system can help him. And we'll talk about a lot of other college football stuff as well, with the college football playoff set to begin on Friday. Today's show is brought to you by the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte area. I'm talking about Nana's Porch, your go-to for all your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, a birthday, anniversary, or graduation or engagement celebration. Whatever your catering event and your catering needs, Nana's Porch has got you covered. So go to the homepage, nanasporch.com. That's NASPORCH.com. Get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne. Tell him the good folks at Gamecock Pod Live sent you. You'll love it. Great food, unparalleled service. They're shutting it down for the holidays, but the 2026 calendar is open. It's filling up quickly. Wedding season will be here before you know it. So go to the homepage, nanasporch.com. Get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne, and they will get you set up. All right, just a couple of quick news notes before we bring in Clark, and that is Gamecock men's basketball lost at Clemson last night, 68-61. Only 2 players in double figures. Mike Sharvjamps, 13 points, and Kevin Knox, 13 points. The Gamecocks continue cold shooting, just 37% from the field and just 4 of 26 from behind the three-point line. And it is going to be a very long season for the Gamecocks. Reports from the Shrine Bowl from Charles Powers from Rivals and On3. Gamecock commitment or signees standing out. Potential 5-star offensive lineman Zion Giles, the best lineman on either team by far, according to Powers. And safety Jazavian Currents, an alpha dog, a standout of the day. And Tristan Lewis, 6'3.5", 6'4", 200, also standing out up there. Saquel Patterson is actually playing cornerback this week. But lots of good news on that front. And this morning, Gamecock offensive guard Trevon Ball announced he will officially enter the transfer portal. And I just don't think he is the type of lineman that will fit in the Kendal Briles system. We're getting ready to talk about all of that as we welcome back in to the program kind of the Frank Caliendo lookalike. Clark, I don't know if anyone's ever told you that, the comedian who impersonates John Gruden, John Madden, so many great impersonations, but we love the energy and the knowledge, and that's why you're here. And so, how was your Thanksgiving, and what's going on with On3 and Rivals as we head into the holiday season here? Uh-oh. Clark, I can't hear you. Hang on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I got you.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
Perfect.
Thanksgiving was great, Keith. I had a nice Kentucky farm ham glazed with Sprite, so give it a little extra kick. Loads of ooey gooey mac and cheese and Sister Schubert rolls. That was all up my alley. But of course, this time of year, we're focusing on the transfer portal. Like you just mentioned, lots of kids are already starting to pre-enter here. Almost about 700 already. So for numbers' sake, last year we had about 3,500 to 4,000 kids total throughout that period. We are tracking well beyond that. Of course, now this year there's only going to be that one portal window, early January for 14 days, as opposed to the two separate 30-day windows in the early winter and then later in the spring. So, yeah, there's going to be a whole lot of logistical issues, but you know what? I'm going to be here and ranking every single player along the way.
All right, good stuff. So, Clark, let's face it, the transfer portal, it doesn't open officially until January the 2nd, but the portal is open. There's tampering, back channeling. Eli Drinkowitz went off publicly about it, and then
let's remember, this is what the coaches wanted. They did not want these two windows. They wanted this one window. So when you do that, and if you're a player, it behooves you to be tampered with. Because look, this is about providing individual value for your individual situation. Now, obviously, when you're doing it on a yearly basis, it creates bubbles. But for the fact of the matter is, if you're a player, that's the best way to maximize your value. You have to sell yourself every year. That's just the matter of the situation. But coaches, of course, decision makers, of course, people that control the labor, obviously they want more restrictions so they can obviously build upon what they have. But of course, in a individual rights economy, it's very hard to accomplish that, of course. And there's a lot of different guardrails, of course, a lot of different discussions for how to fix this and and guide us along our way the next half decade to a decade. But obviously there's gonna be a lot of complaining in the short term, both from both parties, from players thinking they have less restrictions, less ability to move between these players with the one window. Same time, you're going to hear those tampering concerns from everyone else who are in the decision maker side. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's only going to get messier and messier as the month progresses.
So bear with me here for a second. So I see it from both sides. As a former coach, I get it. They want to know after spring practice, even going into spring practice, what their football team is going to look like.
Yes.
Okay. So you have the January window only, 14 days.
Mm-hmm.
But as a player and as a parent, I see the other side of the coin, because let's say I'm on the 2 deep, the guy just graduated that was the starter heading into spring practice. I'm a starter. Then, my school goes out and recruits 3 offensive guards, and I'm an offensive guard, and then I get buried on the depth chart. I'm stuck.
Right.
Until the next season. I think all it's going to take, Clark, is one lawsuit from a player like that plays for Lane Kiffin, the self-proclaimed portal king. Now the Tiger King is out of jail, and I've heard he's moved to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So, the NCAA, I think, is never won a lawsuit. And I think all it will take will be one player getting buried on a depth chart from the transfer portal and then not being able to transfer to another school where they could be a starter and flourish and play. For that to get blown up, and maybe you'll have a 10 to 14 day window again in May after spring practice. I think this is a temporary thing. I could be wrong. I want your take on it.
It's just a mess. It's an insanity. It's a logistical issue. Of course, with how the football schedule doesn't necessarily align with the academic schedule with these extra games and this expanded playoff, it's just created all these issues. And I think a lot of people have said what you said. Hey, let's just wait until the spring semester after spring ball, and then you can have the entire summer to transfer. That way it's outside the academic window. It's a more or less dead period where, of course, it's a lot easier to travel or go on visits when it's 70 and sunny, as opposed to going to some places when it's, freezing cold, ice cold everywhere, with all the air travel issues that they're already going on when it is a bright and sunny day. There's just a lot of other things just tangentially outside of just the window itself that just causes us so many issues. You have to get your evals down super quick, and you got to nail these people. And then when they're on campus, you got to gauge their personality in an 8-hour window. That's very tough to do. So I think just giving a little bit more room to breathe. Obviously, you're going to have situations like we do now where kids prematurely enter, but in terms of how it aligns with everything, it just would be a much better fit if everyone just waited until after spring ball and then go willy-nilly with the portal, because then you would have a better sense of like where people are on the depth chart and proper value that way, as opposed to guesstimating how people are going to progress over an off-season training program during the winter months. So yeah, I'm aligned with you there. It's just with how toothless the NCAA is as an entity, you mentioned, yeah, there's going to be a lot more lawsuits in all facets trying to test how can they enforce things. Because guess what? They can't until they get the federal government to give them some more power, which, of course, why would they? You've proven you can't govern in the past. Your current leadership is behind, and all the, let's just say, vocal decision makers are wanting something else, a new entity to take form. If that's the case, why are you going to go back and give an archaic model some more power? So yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting, to say the least, depending whether it is going to be a court decision or if it's just going to be a straight up revolution in terms of these decision makers withdrawing and doing their own thing. Of course, with how the money flows are right now for them, they're always hesitant. They talk out of both sides of their mouths. Of course, the NCAA are just the college presidents. And of course, as we know, they like to make that faceless entity, the NCAA, the boogeyman, while they themselves start to negotiate with private equity firms and all these other types of entities that could give them additional cash flows, which they argue against, but they also want. So there's just a lot of inconsistency that I'm quite frankly getting numb to and jaded with. But of course, that's just part of the job. I just think end of the day, yeah, NCAA is going to face a whole lot of troubles, both from the player side and potentially from the administration side in the short term. So I would love to see that portal window move, but yeah, for the time being, it's just going to be a big old mess.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the 2 windows because as a coach,
yeah,
you love to get guys in mid-semester. So they come in, they go through your strength and conditioning program. Coaches get to do more with players now prior to and after spring practice than before, and then go through spring, and then you kind of have a really good idea of who's on your roster. But maybe you have an injury or two. Maybe there's still 1 or 2 spots you want to shore up. Well, to me, that's what that second portal period's for guys that you recruit over, get them out. If your field goal kickers are not making their kicks, then you can go in the portal and maybe you get a field goal kicker that can make the difference between making a 16-team college football playoff or not. I mean, we all know, particularly in the SEC, which you've covered very well over your career, the margins for error are razor thin.
And they're getting even thinner with these, like with the new clock rules. Now everyone's kind of going back to ball control management. First down by volumes are low, are down. Points are still fine, but yeah, like that's just less opportunities per game. So it just puts an extra premium every time you have the ball. So while winning the explosive play battle is still very prevalent, we're getting closer to that NFL model to where, that old school turnover battle is becoming just as irrelevant as it was 50 years ago, just because of how the game is playing and how there's reduced opportunities. So yeah, I agree with you there. Yeah.
All right. So let's turn our attention for the time being on South Carolina. I've been watching South Carolina football since 1973. So since I was 9 years old. And I, quite frankly, outside of the media's expectations for South Carolina in 2014, when the SEC network launched, South Carolina was ranked in the top 5. I still don't think Greg McElroy has forgiven South Carolina. He picked them to win the national championship, and they end up 7-6 that year with a nice win in a cold, rainy Shreveport over Miami. I was there. They just couldn't stop anybody on defense. But to me, this is easily the most disappointing season. The expectations, the return of LaNorris Sellers, who was unstoppable the last half of the season in 2024. Then, they make an in-house promotion from Dow Loggins, who leaves to go to Appalachian State as head coach. They promote Mike Shula, and it was just a disaster. The offensive line coach got fired midseason. He probably should have been fired 2 years ago.
Or not even promoted at all.
Right, exactly. Shula, I thought coming off a 9-3 season with LaNorris Sellers returning with a world-class sprinter like Nyck Harbor, South Carolina had signed a bevy of 4-star young wide receivers that most all enrolled early. It was a very attractive job. I mean, you had 5-star, 4-star offensive linemen, one of the top young tight ends in the country, and Michael Smith, who is one of the top-rated players in the transfer portal because Shula wouldn't give him a chance. He was behind because he injured his shoulder. He had to have shoulder surgery, missed spring ball, wanted the red shirt, and they said no, and he said, well, I'm going in the transfer portal. He's probably one of the first players to enter the transfer portal.
Oh, he was. Again, as On3's transfer portal rankings are, I can tell you, yeah, he was one of the first guys that I signed to score to.
Yeah. And, just a disastrous offense.
To say the
And
least. I don't think you
to
realize
say the least.
37% success rate in both facets, run and pass. For context sake, no other SEC offense had a success rate below 39. So they were well below everyone else. And it wasn't just being bad at passing or being bad at running. It's being bad at everything. They didn't have a single run concept that they featured at least 10 times post a success rate over 45%, which is generally fine to good to average for, your bankable concepts. But yeah, they just could not really find anything down to down, game to game that gave them an identity where they felt good that they could move the ball outside of this one particular RPO, which is gaining a lot of steam. They ran it 33 times and they actually averaged 10 yards per attempt on it because of some long gains. But it's that wheel switch. So that's a wheel and a post and breaker with a slide or a flat underneath. It's a very common pattern with play action bootlegs, but like I mentioned, it's becoming a very popular look in the RPO game, both in college and in the NFL. Well, I would say that it was the most distinguishable play that South Carolina ran. And like I mentioned, 10 yards per play. That's really good. But outside of that, yeah, there was just really nothing at all that was working. And when nothing's working, it's really hard to build an identity. And if you don't know who you are, how can you go out there and confidently play? So one of the things that I loved to point to, you already mentioned the ineptitude from the offensive line and the poor blocking. Well, it all starts up front. And throughout Shane Beamer's entire tenure at South Carolina, they have had at least, because there have been seasons where they've been worse, a 10% negative play rate. So 1 out of 10 plays, on average, you're moving your ass backwards. And guess what? Outside of Oklahoma last year, they've been dead last in the SEC doing that under Shane Beamer every single year. So I mentioned it's hard to execute when you're moving backwards. Of course it is. It's hard to move forward when you cannot block. It is just paramount. So one of the Sellers' biggest issues is just the lack of trust. It's one thing to drop your eyes against the rush if no one's open downfield, but when you have two offensive linemen that lose instantaneously as soon as the ball is snapped and you have to play hero ball, it just inherently curbs your development. So no matter how talented you are, no matter how high we are on his capabilities, the fact of the matter is, right now, he's just failed to reach his potential because his environment has just completely let him down, and he's just not been able to take that next step in terms of what is asked from him and how he can elevate the team, because he's just constantly looking to erase mistakes as soon as the freaking ball is snapped. And, of course, that's just a terrible modus operandi, down to down, like we mentioned, dead last in the SEC with a 37% success rate.
I mean, historically, this was the worst offense at South Carolina since 1999 when Lou Holtz came, and they were decimated by injuries and went 0-11. I mean, Mike Shula worse than Marcus Satterfield, okay, which is hard to be worse than Marcus Satterfield, but they were worse scoring, worse rushing, worse in almost every category. In that year, South Carolina used 4 different quarterbacks in 2021. Mm-hmm. So Shane Beamer has made a radical departure because the first 3, all NFL backgrounds. All right. In the NFL, as we all know, the hash marks are different. They're in the middle of the field. So there really isn't a wide side of the field. And so they like to bunch everybody up. I never understood, as an old offensive line coach in high school football, we had wide splits. We had at least 2-foot splits between the center and the guard, 3-foot splits between the guard and tackle, and we spread it out. You go back and look at South Carolina under each one of these NFL guys, you're going to see 6-inch to 1 foot splits, which means to create a crease in the run game, you have to move the biggest, most athletic men in the world that are not yet in the National Football League to create a run game. Kendal Briles, they are going to spread you out, just like Skip Holtz did. They're going to have the wide splits, plus the tempo, NASCAR. They're going to go faster, and they're going to make you account for the entire length and width of the field on every single play, because as you know, that Art Briles system, they spread those wide receivers out as wide as humanly possible, and they're going to make you account for every bit of the field from the line of scrimmage all the way to the end zone. Tell me what you think about the hire of Kendal Briles and what you've seen from him as his system has evolved over time.
Well, like any good play caller, he's really good at tailoring his stuff to what he presently has on the roster. So when he took over the Arkansas job in 2020, Felipe Franks, who's now a NFL tight end, was his passer. They had a lot of RPOs. They passed the ball a lot just to try and take pressure off a very bad offensive line, just trying to distribute, get the ball out. The very next year, KJ Jefferson, different style of quarterback. He's more luggy, heavy feet, bigger arm, not as a quick twitch type of athlete. So we do more RPO driven stuff, more downfield shots driven stuff. Of course, Treylon Burks. I would not think it's a bad comp whatsoever to say he's a Nyck Harbor type. He's a very much, when he was at Arkansas, a vertical downfield threat with a reduced route tree where it wasn't a whole lot of stuff over the middle. It's very much a man beating type of usage there. And of course, he led the SEC in deep pass production. So it was working. So a lot of the stuff was, I already mentioned like the identity stuff earlier. There really wasn't a whole lot of stuff through the air. But again, there was a lot of man beating stuff, a lot of formational stuff, like you mentioned, with the wide splits or the solo isolation plays, just getting him a one-on-one ball matched up with a corner and see if we can make a play that way. The drop back game was kind of rudimentary. There wasn't a whole lot of volume there, but it goes to TCU. You have a passer like Josh Hoover who plays like Drew Brees. He's an undersized in the pocket passer, very accurate, very lethal, particularly in the mid-range and over the middle. That is not what he had at Arkansas. And quite frankly, that's kind of the areas where LaNorris Sellers has necessarily not taken the leap. While he is an accurate downfield thrower, sometimes he doesn't see it well. Sometimes he doesn't anticipate things well. We already mentioned, so yeah, it's really hard to do that when you're constantly dropping your eyes and having to find an area to get to make a play when you're trying to negate bad blocking. But that is one of the areas he's consistently gotten good production out of his quarterbacks because he tailors to their strengths, and he's a very good mind in terms of finding wins. Now, of course, we know for LaNorris Sellers, already mentioned, he has the ability. It's can you go out and show us that? So I think personally, Kendal Briles needs to be doing more of the stuff he's done with Josh Hoover than the stuff he did with KJ Jefferson. KJ Jefferson, while he had a fairly good collegiate career, he wasn't really a serious NFL quarterback like LaNorris Sellers is going to be. Even Josh Hoover, even though he's not the tallest guy, he's got an arm that is absolutely NFL quality, in my opinion. And last year's quarterback impact study, Keith, where I look at everyone against their hardest opponents. We don't want the poop states, to create a bad perception here. We want to get them completely out of this exercise. So just looking at Josh Hoover against his hardest opponents last year, he was the study's most accurate downfield passer. That's not worth nothing. So while he has his own ability, it's also his play caller making sure he sees things and gets the ball to his playmakers. Like I mentioned, he's not the biggest quarterback. Sometimes seeing the field can come a little bit more difficult for those types of people. So we know LaNorris Sellers is 6'3", 6'4". He's got that ideal size, but the vision hasn't been there. So that is optimal for Briles to do that. So the run game, I think there's not going to be a whole lot of deviation there. I think it's still going to be zone-based, which is what Sean Lewis has tried to do since he was hired and ultimately promoted as that interim offensive coordinator. But yeah, like I mentioned, the success has not been there. While it might be an identity, sure, and I do believe that is where the offense is going, or how the offense is going to function on the ground. Where's the identity going to come through the air? Where's the consistent confidence you're going to provide LaNorris Sellers going to come from? And that's absolutely something I'm going to be interested to see how it evolves over the next few months.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I want to see more of the Arkansas stuff because
just
got a runner
shot plays. Because I mean, I would say South Carolina kind of sort of does that already. Think of how many deep posts that actually were connected on this year. It's basically the same play as the Yankee concept. So it's just a deep overcross post, or excuse me, a deep overcross cross with a post over top. You're trying to create a high-low read on that safety. Say if it's too high and you have that heavy set play action, you get one of those guys to collapse in the box. All of a sudden it's single high and you have a deep cross racing across the field that's uncapped. It's a very hard bit of cheese to pass up and maintain that discipline to not bite up, because if you don't bite up, that deep post is going to be wide open. And as we saw, Sellers and Harbor, even with bad offensive line and even with, let's just say, subpar play calling, they were able to execute that fairly well. So, yes, there is absolutely opportunity to nail those one-on-one shots, because that would lead me into my next point that I forgot to bring up, Keith, that I think would absolutely excite you. Do you know what offense led the SEC in explosive play rate from 2021 to 2022? Maybe the Arkansas Razorbacks. So, yeah, that is a team that absolutely, with that pace, with the schemed prudence, taking downfield shots once, people are looking in the backfield with all, I wouldn't say it was a motion-heavy scheme, but there was enough action and stuff to keep people honest. And like I mentioned, very effective getting explosive plays, basically a sixth of their plays from 2021 to 2022 was a run of at least 10 yards or a pass of at least 20 yards. So very capable of providing splash plays. And when you have someone like, these God-given traits that are on South Carolina's offense, you'd think it's a good fit. I'm just a little bit, just from where I stand as a charter, as an analyst, I would like to see a little bit more sophistication than some of the, the very simple avenues that they did at Arkansas. And I would like to see a little bit more smart evolution, kind of the stuff he's done at TCU, because again, it will help LaNorris Sellers run a pro style scheme, which he's going to have to do if he wants to be a professional, and help him develop anticipation, which is a vital trait if he's going to succeed at the next level.
I completely agree. But so I like the outside zone, the inside zone stuff. Yeah. It will be RPO, but with the quarterback run game, because LaNorris Sellers' legs are one of his most valuable commodities.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing that Mike Shula took away from him that led to a lack of confidence, a lot of indecision, is because Shula, from the opening press conference, talked about keeping him in the pocket, and at times it looked like Sellers was just chained to the pocket. And look, his job is not to make him look like a rookie quarterback in the National Football League, which is what he looked like this year. It's to win games and to allow him to play free. And I think with the Briles system of up-tempo NASCAR, playing fast, wide splits, not having to read as much, I think that will be a complete rehabilitation for LaNorris Sellers, while at the same time adding some of that TCU stuff, because Josh Hoover, quite frankly, Clark, if we raced Josh Hoover in a 40-yard dash, it may be a dead heat, because he is not a threat to run whatsoever, which kind of limited what Kendal Briles could do in the run game. Because for the first time, he didn't have even at Baylor, you go back and look, even Bryce Petty could run a little bit. Jared Stidham could run a little bit. I mean, you saw Baylor in the 2014 Cotton Bowl against Michigan State with Bryce Petty. They threw for over 600 yards, which was more than any other team in NCAA history had thrown in a bowl game. The next year, their top 2 quarterbacks are injured. Their top wide receivers injured. They play North Carolina and rush for almost 650 yards in a game. And so I love the diversity and the simplification of the Briles scheme compared to what he's had to go through and process so much information. It's taken away his ability to play free, which Dow Loggins unlocked that cheat code that allowed him to play free after their second open date in 2024, and Sellers was unstoppable.
I wouldn't go that far because he was leaving plays on the field when he was playing free, and that's a problem. It just is. If you're not seeing open men, how are you going to throw the open men the ball? That's a problem. And that's why I keep saying this anticipation, his ability to see the field has been a consistent concern for mine, because even when he was playing at his best, he was bailing early and not seeing open men downfield. So this is from last year's quarterback impact study, like I mentioned. It's against their hardest opponents in the SEC, and including Clemson, I guess. So their top 3 most featured drop back pass concepts were all verts, sail, and mesh. Pretty basic stuff. But they ran those about 98 times across last year. Of those plays alone, 33% resulted in a sack or a scramble. Do you think that's sustainable over the course of a season? Because I don't. And while I think, I wouldn't necessarily say lock him inside the pocket, he's got to learn how to play inside the pocket. He's got to learn how to see things. You cannot constantly allow things to break down and play Superman ball. It's just not sustainable. You're going to get hurt. You're going to be compromised. You're going to be pressured into mistakes when things are just constantly chaotic for you. So you have to find more of a consistent floor. Now, what South Carolina tried to do, well, let's just do more short area pass patterns. Make him a pre-snap decision maker. Get the ball out where we can mitigate this terrible blocking up front, and the ball's out before we matter. Well, unfortunately, you do that so often, defenses know what's coming, and you don't have vertical separators or savvy route runners, and you have that bad blocking. Well, it just leads itself to manifest the exact thing you're trying to get rid of. More broken plays, asking your quarterback to go make a play when no one's open. It's an unfortunate side effect because they just were handcuffed in how they had to operate. So while I'm with you, he's absolutely a backyard baller. He's often his best self when he's outside the pocket or when things break down. I'm just saying sustainability, especially if you're looking at it from a pro scout perspective, you just have to see him be able to take care of business in structure more often. And while Kendal, that's why I keep saying the Josh Hoover stuff, because that's what Josh Hoover had to do. So we know Briles is capable of getting that out of somebody. Now, is Sellers going to display the comfort that is required for that to happen? Not everyone is capable of just standing in the pocket when things break down and not wanting to break rank, not wanting to burst to green grass, and have that anticipation, have that patience, have that discipline to know, okay, this dig's going to be open in a half second. I just have to hold my water until I get my window and I can release it, as opposed to just completely bailing on that avenue and just trying to have something happen as an adjustment once you break rank. So I'm with you. Yes, absolutely. He is an absolutely special talent outside of structure, but he will not reach his full potential until he becomes a more dangerous passer within the pocket. And I think some of that comes on him having a little bit more discipline and seeing the field a little bit better. But of course, like we mentioned, having a good environment around him is essential for him to try and level up in that regard, or else he's just going to be in a state of perennial arrested development if he's consistently having to deal with that offensive line failing to block people under 2 seconds. Because there's so many quick pressures on his profile that just makes the rep completely useless to try and analyze.
84 sacks the last 2 seasons. South Carolina's offensive line.
Way too much. And again, it ties into that negative play rate, like I mentioned earlier. It's way too high for anyone to try and negate. It's just way too much. So hopefully they bring in some bodies with a pulse that can block, because the previous bunch, like the last 5 years, no matter who's put in there, just bad. bad enough. And while a lot of people, South Carolina fans, want to say Beamer's on the hot seat, absolutely. For me, it's like it's just same old, same old. This has been a consistent issue, and I don't know if he can fix it because it's been a consistent half-decade-long point where he's not been able to fix the offensive line. So, well, yeah, he can recruit. He can get great athletes, but obviously there's a cap on the program because as a former offensive line coach, I'm sure you can attest it all starts up front.
It does. And so that's why I really like the hire of Randy Clements, who Kendal Briles has known since he was 12 years old, who worked with his dad at Stephensville High School in Texas, then the University of Houston, then Baylor, where they had great success, where their quarterbacks did not get sacked very much. Yeah. To his other stops at North Texas, where they led the conference and top 5 in rushing yards. Tell me just your thoughts on what you've seen over the course of his career at Houston, at Baylor, at other stops from Randy Clements. And look, player development and coaching matters. Toughness and discipline matters. We just saw just an unacceptable amount of pre-snap penalties until Sean Elliott took over that offensive line. But, I mean, you can't correct 4 years of a lack of player discipline and player development in half a season. Now, you've got the transfer portal, but there are a number of highly talented, highly rated offensive linemen on this roster that played better as true freshmen as they did as their career progressed because they were not being developed. They were too heavy. They were too slow. And just, I think, lack of player development and scheme, not having the, wide splits to create more of a run game, just put more pressure on those guys. I'm excited to see what Clements can do. What are your thoughts on offensive line play in the Briles system?
So offensive line play, like there's a lot of outside zone stuff. But like I mentioned, there's a lot of scheming elements to take pressure off of them. There's not a whole lot of deep set drops. There's not a whole lot of under center or pistol stuff where you're kind of inviting the defense closer to the line of scrimmage for deception tactics. Like I mentioned, it's pretty basic spread stuff to where technique and leverage is more important than necessarily powerfully driving someone off the ball. So with that in mind, there's a more emphasis on athletic lines that can move. And I should mention, of course, while South Carolina was kind of bad, one of the premier elements last year was their screen game. That's getting linemen out in space. And while I'm not the biggest fan of screens, I think they're definitely a desperation play. A lot of them are run when you're behind the chains and they have a very low success rate as is, but South Carolina, they were actually pretty good at that type of stuff. So that tells me they already have a line that can kind of move and play in space occasionally. Again, it's not something I would like to do every single series, but when you know that the scheme is going to put an emphasis on being able to move, being able to seal, being able to out leverage people, I really think it's a good fit. Like I mentioned, I don't think there would have been a whole lot of people they could have hired that would have been a downgrade. I think they came in with a pretty much rock bottom perspective with that unit. So I do think it is an upgrade without question. And look, this is a person that has, with every stop he's gone to, like you mentioned, pretty good results. And they didn't necessarily have a whole lot of resources to work with. So while you are higher on South Carolina's young blue chip prospects on that offensive line, I'm a little bit more wait and see. It should be on paper at least more than he's had to work with historically. So like I mentioned, he didn't really have a whole lot to work with, but he got pretty good results. So with that idea in mind, I'd like to think, they can at least climb outside the bottom 5 in the conference and get closer to average. And if they're closer to average, well, gosh, they can be in a lot more contests because, like I mentioned, these margins are getting smaller and smaller and smaller in these conference games to where, one possession can really flip ball games way more than it had been the last decade or so when there's extra possessions and everyone's trying to whip the ball around and get explosive plays. So I do think it's a great fit. And while my expectations are pretty measured, I'm just asking, hey, just be average, just be mid.
That's right.
Just don't be the worst in the freaking conference at this, and let's see what happens, because I think it absolutely can raise the teams and the program's floor moving forward, and potentially save Beamer's job. Because if they remain to be the worst line in the conference, sorry, bye-bye. And that's me coming from it objectively as a non-South Carolina fan, someone just looking at the outside in. It's like, what are you doing besides getting good talent and getting them drafted? You're here to win ball games. And you're not going to be able to win ball games if you can't win the line of scrimmage.
No doubt about it. So I want to get your thoughts on the development of Nyck Harbor and the emergence of Dre Jacobs, and over the course of the second half of the season, LaNorris Sellers' little brother, Jaden Puppy Sellers, who, man, that guy plays hard.
Yeah.
They return all 3 of those guys. Jacobs proved, just like Harbor, to be a vertical threat in the pass game, several long touchdowns.
If you recall against Kentucky, what was that play? It was that slide wheelie RPO I mentioned earlier, and he housed it for 72 yards or something like that. But yeah, it's adding more potency for this offense, because it's really hard to be consistent down to down if you can't block, but you can still gain an explosive play every once in a while, as we saw with this offense. So Nyck Harbor, it seems to me, all the things you would want in a world from a vertical straight line sprinter. Very good getting open on deep post, really good at maximizing when people take their eyes off him. But what he cannot do is necessarily run multi-breaker stuff over the middle, drags through the teeth of the defense. He definitely prefers to operate outside the numbers. And of course, that's going to reduce how you can be impactful. If defenses know you can only run 4 or 5 routes, well, they're going to run certain types of shell coverages to keep you capped and not necessarily worried about you underneath, because you're not necessarily capable of hurting him that way. So we have thought, so I say we as in our On3 brain trust. You already mentioned Charles Powers earlier. He's our director of scouting. He's involved with all this. So we were thinking, so why was it Jaden Sellers, the young pup, who got the lion's share of all? You mentioned like the 4-star freshmen, you mentioned like Brian Rowe, all those guys, they didn't see as much volume, nor were emphasized to get the ball as much as Jaden Sellers. So while we think he's a solid, nice little player, we just think it just speaks volumes on how he was given opportunities as a true freshman compared to other people on this roster. Now, of course, a cynic could say, well, they're just trying to appease LaNorris Sellers and keep him there so he can play with his brother. Of course, that's not an argument that's not worth nothing. That's definitely on the table. And of course, with the Kendal Briles stuff, just more appeasement, I think, because we felt, for the last month, he should probably get out of there. I already mentioned how his development has stagnated for a lot of different reasons, and while probably a fresh shot may have helped, but if you're going to be there, it absolutely helps to have someone you trust, and you definitely trust your brother to make plays. So that's getting the ball out on time, and in an area where he can make plays after the catch, because that's a lot of the ways he was getting the ball. A lot of short stuff, a lot of go make the play with the ball in your hands, kid. Not so much as a downfield threat. Sure, he was thrown to in the drop back game, but a lot of his stuff was quick game oriented, scheme oriented, just to get him design touches. And Dre Jacobs, he's certainly an X factor to keep an eye on moving forward. Of course, his first half of the season, much better than the second half of the season, but he provided that explosivity. And when there's someone else that can be a threat for the defense and they have to, worry about him, can't double everybody. So that just provides a little bit more opportunities for Nyck Harbor to get open. So it's just a matter of providing different heats, different threats, different areas of the field to get other people open. Because if you know, I can only use Nyck Harbor this way, well, that's relying on other people to get open. Like we mentioned in basketball season, well, if you just have that one really good back to the basket post center, and that's all you have, it's really easy for a defense just to collapse and make things difficult on him. But if you also have a really good post presence and you have 2 or 3, 3-point shooters to keep them honest, it's immensely more difficult to defend. So that's the analogy I like to use with pass catching units. Everyone kind of has a different skill set, but it's a matter of spacing and resource allocation for the defense and what they choose to take away. And if he's just only going to be that downfield vertical threat, much easier to stop than if you have other avenues available. And since we kind of see he's not quite capable like A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf, these other big burly behemoths that can, sprint vertically and win on in breakers, it just makes it a little bit harder as a play caller. And thank goodness those guys have emerged, because if they didn't, I'm not so certain we would see those deep Yankee posts touchdowns emerge as the season went along. Of course, there were some in the early part of the season because teams, what are they going to throw at us with this new play caller? Are they going to change things? No, they basically kept it as is. But I would say, from my vantage point, I would love to see a more eclectic route tree from Nyck Harbor. But at this point, after 4 years, I think he is who he is. I think he's just a vertical north-south deep threat type of guy. Burly, absolutely. He's got that frame. But I would really like to point to Treylon Burks as that comp there for what he did at Arkansas, how he was used, and how he was productive. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how we think you're going to be used if you don't produce yards. Who cares? He was an all-SEC receiver. He was a first-round draft pick because of how he was able to win. I wouldn't say simplistic, but would say rudimentary route tree under Briles before.
So I think obviously Mike Shula did not utilize all of the talent at his disposal. South Carolina redshirted 3 very talented 4-star wide receivers. Malik Clark, who was a one-time Florida State commitment, 6'3", 10.55, 500 meters guy. He redshirted. Jordan Gidron, who reclassified, he ran at 6'2", 190, 10.6 as a sophomore in high school in the 100 meters. And Lex Cyrus, the number 1 receiver out of Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, as a junior in high school, 10.4 in the 100 meters. He's more of a slot guy, but you add 3 big-time speed guys to the equation here. And with Mike Furry, a former NFL wide receiver, NFL wide receiver coach, a guy who in the first year Nyck Harbor solely concentrated on football, you saw how much better he got. He's going to do that again. You're going to have these younger guys, I think, with probably more plays and more passing elements in that spread Briles attack, more 4 wide, more empty 5 wide at times maybe. There's going to be opportunities there, and I think all of these guys still have ceilings that have not been reached. I mean, maybe that's just me as a Gamecock fan, but I've followed recruiting since I was 15 years old. I've never seen South Carolina sign as many 4-star wide receivers or have as many big-time guys as they currently have on their roster since Joe Morrison was running the run and shoot with Todd Ellis. And they had Sterling Sharp and all these fast guys just spreading the field. I think to me that has to be one thing that gives South Carolina fans hope. And I think one thing that once Kendal Briles gets into workouts and sees this will excite him, because Baylor, they just always had these fast guys that nobody had ever heard of because there's so many players in Texas. But Kendal Briles was a prolific recruiter and evaluator, and sometimes he would get guys committed to Baylor in the summer, and then they would have huge senior years, and Texas A&M, and Oklahoma or Ohio State would come in there and flip them from Baylor. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you can't teach speed. And if you want to try and give someone confidence and get the ball out of their hands and make them feel more comfortable, well, you get open. And of course, it's easier to get open if you're faster than the guy trying to cover you. So yeah, absolutely. That's not worth nothing, the stuff they have. I would say they were redshirted for more of the other intangible stuff, reading defenses, knowing techniques, route running, hand fighting, being able to create that separation when you don't have just that first step speed to beat somebody. But you're absolutely right. But I would also mention, even though it is the quote-unquote Briles system, the veer and shoot, of course, that's what Josh Heupel does at Tennessee. He does a lot more, I would say, traditional rendition of that scheme. That is true 5 wide, those double stack splits. That is definitely more prevalent down there. Even in the past year when they did more conventional things to help Joey Aguilar be more comfortable. So I don't think that's worth nothing. So while it is going to be more spread, it's not super spready. It's not like stupid doing all the silly stuff in that aspect. So I mentioned that because Jalen Hyatt at Tennessee, fastest guy on the field, hasn't really manifested as an NFL receiver, but he was still a first-round pick because of his blazing speed. He was still one of the most productive receivers in the SEC because of that blazing speed. And if you have 2 or 3 guys with that blazing speed, like I mentioned earlier, it is so much more difficult to plan for and to cap on a down-to-down basis if you are a defense. So I do agree with you. It is an immense area to be optimistic for this offense. It's just, okay, how is it going to develop? Because you mentioned the development. Well, part of that development is that initial evaluation. I would probably say 80% of the job, whether from the people you hire to the people you recruit, to the people you sign, to the people you go after in the portal, 80% of the job nowadays is talent evaluation. So, again, and that starts if we know from the get-go, okay, he's worth investing in, or if he's a dud and you just don't know it, that can set you back a few years. So getting them on campus, obviously you don't know for sure what the situation is, but that tells me with all of them being redshirted in a position group that needed some pop, tells me they probably had some refinement to go along and develop with them. But again, you can't teach speed. And you mentioned all those 100-yard meter dash scores. They definitely have enough in their arsenal to get some of that potency. Like I mentioned earlier, Arkansas from 2021 to 2022, number 1 in the SEC creating explosive plays. Easiest way to get an explosive pass is a downfield 20-yard completion. And of course, the easiest way to do that is just to whip your man off the line of scrimmage with your speed or with your natural ability. So the recipes are there. I'm just a little bit more wait and see to see how it all comes together.
No doubt. Clark, great stuff. Tell us where everybody can find your work, where they can follow you for all of the great work you are doing for On3 and the Rivals Network.
Still operate SECStatCat.com. It's under still some construction, so I don't know if I'm going to be doing any content while that is going on, but all the stats from this regular season are there. So if you want to see pass charts or concepts people run, advanced statistics by the offensive skill players, that's all there for people's disposal to, become a little bit more acclimated on potential transfer portal additions. Of course, since we do have that one window now, we don't have to worry about that second window that disallows that interconference transfer. So I would become, I would just encourage average fans, writers, no matter who you are, just become a little bit more educated in how your team operates. Like I mentioned, the concepts that people run, the scripts that they run on every single game are there at your disposal. And of course, during the transfer portal season, I will be On3's basically ranking czar. I will have support from Charles and our other high school recruiting staff, but it's largely my baby. And that's going to be ranking 4,000 guys. So I'd like to think I have a pretty good track record. You can go look at last year's rankings. I was the highest on Fernando Mendoza. I was highest on Brock Pollock. I was highest on Clev Lubin. A lot of names that you might not have heard of this time last year. I was already on the up and up on them. So be looking at that. Of course, we've already had 5 big name quarterbacks already enter the portal at this time this week. So there's going to be more that's going to be trickling in until the floodwaters completely officially open on January 2nd, but be looking out for me. And of course, you can follow me while I am doing these quarterback impact studies, charting these quarterbacks against their hardest opponents. I'll be doing that all off season. Follow along on Twitter at ClarkBrooks_on On3. Rebranded. That was on the bosses. It used to be SEC StatCat. Unfortunately, with a more national approach, I do cover teams outside the SEC. They thought it would be a little bit more accurate to have that type of a new handle. So that's the new handle, even though it's the same old tweet, same spot. It's just a new name. So again, that is at Clark Brooks _on3 on Twitter /X.
Clark, thank you so much. Great stuff. As always, bringing it like nobody else. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you. And we will try to circle back after this portal window closes to get your thoughts on South Carolina's transfer portal class, which I think will be heavy on both lines of scrimmage, running back, tight end, and probably a couple, 3 players sprinkled into the secondary. But
hey, let's get you all another alpha pass rusher to put opposite Dylan Stewart and make his job even easier. I mean, you look at all the best lines last few years in college football, they all had 4 dudes who commanded things. They didn't just have one alpha. No, you got to spread the heat around, and you get, like we mentioned with the receivers, you got to threaten at different areas and make sure their resource allocation, talking about the offensive line and their blocking, is consistently compromised. It's a lot easier to double or triple team one person and worry about a bunch of schlubs than worrying about 4 really, really good pass rushers. I mean, think of Texas Tech, think of Miami, think of Ole Miss. These are all recent examples that are heavy in the portal and heavy getting dogs that just disallow anyone from having double teams across the scope of a game, just because it's impossible to do so with 4 awesome bodies. So still love Dylan Stewart, but let's make his job a little bit easier and get another dynamic pass rusher, which, of course, in the portal, there's always something to be plucked away.
No doubt about it. Clark, thank you so much. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll look forward to catching up with you next month after the transfer portal window closes. And thank you so much for all that you do and for being so gracious with your time.
Right back at you, Keith. It's always a pleasure.
All right. That is Clark Brooks from On3, bringing it like nobody else. All right. So I'm not Scott Van Pelt, but I am bald. I do wear glasses and a headset like him. And so to end today's Gamecock Pod Live, which will be the last Gamecock Pod Live of the year, I've got one big thing. And that is, this week we all mourn the passing of former Gamecock great quarterback Steve Taneyhill, who passed away at just 52 years of age. I remember back into the fall of 1992 when this young, brash, cocky 18-year-old from Altoona, Pennsylvania showed up in his GT Mustang convertible with a license plate that simply said SCQB on it. And in an era where everybody had short hair, Steve Taneyhill had long hair. Some say a mullet. I call it a ponytail. But he was just different from the moment he showed up. It was the Gamecocks' inaugural season in the Southeastern Conference, and South Carolina was still trying to put behind it a steroid scandal that rocked the program, the death of head coach Joe Morrison, known as the Man in Black, and what seemed like an insurmountable task for new head coach Sparky Woods going into the Southeastern Conference and competing in the toughest conference in America. Well, that 1992 season couldn't have gotten off to a worse start. The team was 0-5. They were blown out by Arkansas and Alabama. Their starting quarterback quit after being benched after the East Carolina game. Wright Mitchell, Blake Williamson started the Alabama game. South Carolina was spinning out of control. And what had been a tough 5 years for the Gamecocks since the back-to-back 1987, 1988 teams who won 8 games. There was just no hope. 0-5 going into an open date. They had not been competitive. There was a player revolt. The team had voted 62-24 to ask Sparky Woods to resign. He refused. He brought the team together. He said, we're all in this together. It's all on us to change things. But what he did was insert the long-haired 18-year-old cocky, confident Altoona, Pennsylvania native as the starting quarterback. South Carolina, after the open date, had a home game against number 15 ranked Mississippi State, led by future Hall of Famer Jackie Sherrill. During the open date, the team had been called cursed. There were actual ceremonies held outside of Williams-Brice Stadium to lift the curse. But really, the credit went to the players, which were reinvigorated and re-energized by an 18-year-old that, just like the song Madonna sang, not girls, football players wanted to have fun. And starting on Saturday, October the 17th, 1992, Steve Taneyhill made South Carolina football fun again with a 21-6 upset win over Mississippi State. I was there. I remember it well. I was one of just 55,700 fans that showed up in a 72,000 plus seat Williams-Brice Stadium for that game. But what we witnessed that day was something that had not been seen in years. Tannehill's charisma, his flair for the dramatic, the helmet coming off and the long hair shaking in the end zone after every touchdown, all of a sudden made football fun again. It made it fun for the fans, but more importantly, it was fun for the players. It was infectious. Tannehill's charisma and the fun that he had and the leadership that he showed rubbed off on his teammates, the players that were not only in the huddle with him, but the defense as well. All of a sudden, South Carolina went on a 4-game win streak. They beat Mississippi State. They won a couple of other games thanks to the long-haired freshman quarterback that believed, that knew he was the unquestioned leader of the team. And he believed that every time they went out on the field, they not only could win, but would win. 2 weeks after upsetting Mississippi State, the Gamecocks hosted number 16 Tennessee, led by another SEC legend, Johnny Majors, and a tremendous quarterback in Heath Shuler. That day, Taneyhill had himself a day. 19 of 29, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception in a dramatic 24-23 win over the Volunteers. Again, celebrating, playing to the crowd like a conductor, leading an orchestra. Taneyhill led the Gamecocks down the field time after time, converting critical third downs. On the first drive, hitting Mike Reddick out of the backfield for a 21-yard touchdown. On 3rd and goal from the 3, hitting his favorite target, Toby Cates, for a touchdown. South Carolina, once left for dead, now seemed nearly invincible. After winning 4 straight, South Carolina headed for the Swamp on November 14th to take on a brash, cocky head coach who was unapologetic, just like Taneyhill and Steve Spurrier and the Gators. That would wound up being the only loss the rest of that season. The Gamecocks dropping a 14-9 decision, but not without having a chance to win. Junior college transfer wide receiver Don Chaney dropped a halfback pass wide open in the back of the end zone that could have won that game for South Carolina. But the players didn't duck their head between their tails. They didn't give up. But the next weekend, they would travel to Clemson's Frank Howard Memorial Stadium, known as Death Valley. But that would be the crescendo, the exclamation point of Tannehill's arrival on the national scene. The Gamecocks had not defeated Clemson since 1987 and had not won at Clemson since 1984. It was a cold, rainy day. The ponytail was wet and hanging down. But on the game, in the first quarter, the Gamecocks got on the board first. Taneyhill, in what would become a play that is still frozen in time. On 3rd and goal from the 21-yard line. That's right, 3rd and goal from the 21-yard line. The 6'5" quarterback rolled out of the pocket to his right, finding 6'5" freshman wide receiver Asim Penny, known as Asim the Dream, right at the goal line. The ball crossed the pylon. The official signaled touchdown. But what happened behind the play? Two sports star running back and baseball player Rob DeBoer wound up and threw Taneyhill an imaginary pitch. And Taneyhill caught on national TV with the helmet off, swinging the bat, hitting the metaphorical home run, the home run swing, and then lifting his hands high above his head. A picture that's still remembered in Gamecock lore, and one that has endeared him to Gamecock Nation to this day was born. Taneyhill would go on to lead the Gamecocks on another scoring drive to take the lead 17-13, and then the Gamecocks would take over with about 8 minutes to go at their own 35-yard line. They went 10 plays, 65 yards, every play a run play. South Carolina's offensive line, led by Corey Lucci, Ernest Dye, James Dexter, Antoine Rivens, Kenny Farrell, all just whipping Brenston Buckner and that Clemson defense. And after Brandon Bennett went in untouched from the 3-yard line, Taneyhill took off the helmet once again, celebrating with the crowd. I'll never forget, I was sitting near midfield that day in the Clemson section, and after he hit Asim Penny for that touchdown, ran to the end zone, took his helmet off. A Clemson fan next to me says, "Man, that guy looks like a heavy metal singer from, Guns N' Roses." And I said, "That's right, pal. And we're knocking on heaven's door." And that was true. South Carolina would go on to win that game, finish the season 5-6. Had it not been for porous defenses in 1993 and 1995, there's no doubt in my mind Steve Taneyhill would not only have been South Carolina's career wins leader at quarterback, all of his records as the most career completions, second most career passing yards, most career touchdown passes would have been even more. Taneyhill would go on in 1994 to win again at Death Valley, a 33-7 rout over the Clemson Tigers, and then lead South Carolina to their first bowl win in the 1995 CarQuest, a game which he was named MVP in a 24-21 win over West Virginia. And as sad as we are to have lost Steve this week, much too young, his name and his legacy are forever cemented into Gamecock lore and into the record books. Third most career wins. I could go on and on about 3 of the top 6 highest passing games in Gamecock history, all the records he set. But more importantly than all of those records, Steve Taneyhill inspired a generation of Gamecock fans. He restored hope to a program that at the time he took over seemed hopeless just by making the game fun again. By playing with unbridled passion and inspiring not only his teammates, but every Gamecock fan in that stadium knew that when number 18 was under center, the Gamecocks always had a chance. And so we mourn the passing of Steve Taneyhill, but today we choose to remember him and to celebrate his life and his legacy. Taneyhill went on to be a successful high school coach, winning state championships, a successful businessman. And today we celebrate the life and the legacy of Steve Taneyhill, gone too soon at the age of 52. All right, that is a wrap for today's show. Thanks to Clark Brooks. Thanks to all of you watching and listening. This will be our last Gamecock Pod live of the year, but we will be back bigger and better than ever in 2026. Optimism abounds after the hires of Kendal Briles, Randy Clements, and Stan Drayton, one of the top 3 or 4 running back coaches in all of college football. And so to all of you, I wish peace, harmony, and happiness, and a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and a happy new year to all of you. And we'll be back next year bigger and better than ever. God bless all of you. Go Gamecocks. This is Keith Allsep signing off and saying we'll be back next year. Until then, go Gamecocks. I'm out of here.